Hey, everybody. This is Nevin Gusak, your host of the Populist Patriot, and with me is my special guest. We had him last year. I believe it was in, what was it, June of 2021. Uh, it's Charles Daniels. He is the founder and head of American Workers First. Welcome back to the show, Charles.
I appreciate you having me back. Thank you. It's good to see you.
Oh, it's great seeing you. So tell me a little bit about your organization, American Workers First, how it was founded, why did you find it, constituent groups associated with them. Is it strictly labor? Is it business? So let's start exploring that a little bit.
So it was founded out of pure frustration, pure absolute frustration that when I started talking to folks, as soon as it became a partisan issue, I lost half of my audience. And being in the labor field, I have people from all walks of life. Michigan is very, very purple, right? We have areas that are deep red and areas that are deep blue. And when I met with these different groups, they had different ideologies and they had no common ground on some stuff, but there were places where they always met me in the middle. And I kept hearing these same things over and over again and said, you know what? I'm going to take these 6 core issues that I think we can all have common ground with, and I'm going to use those to bring people together. Because if we can agree on the things that we agree on, at least let's start making some headway. So that was in right to work. I can show you that it's bad for workers. If you work in a right to work state, you make less money, you have fewer benefits, you're more likely to be injured on the job. It doesn't work. There's a reason why the 10 poorest states in America are all right to work. It's fundamentally not working. Second is national call center legislation. I've never met anyone that likes picking up a phone about a product or service they use here in the United States and being connected to a representative overseas. They don't like it. There's more identity theft over there. People have medical information that they're losing. There's just a real issue there. And these companies that are offshoring that work, that's a problem. So that goes to the stop offshoring federal contracts. We give billions and billions of dollars to companies every single year that eliminate jobs here in the United States. Whether it's Boeing, whether it's Ford, whether it's General Motors, whether it's AT&T, they eliminate jobs here in the United States, but they get federal contracts. We pay for that. There's no reason that we should be paying for companies to offshore our work. 4, abolish Citizens United. Our politics has become so tainted by money that you can no longer separate the two. It's absurd, and you can just see all the money that goes into it. It's spent on negativity. So if we can get rid of that, I think it'll make the country a better place and whole. 5, living wages for all Americans. We have to stop suppressing wages. When you hold down anyone's wages, you hold down everyone's wages. And then 6, fix the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. Dropping the corporate interest rate from 35 to 21% didn't work. All these corporations did was buy back their own stock and give their CEOs fat bonuses and continue to eliminate jobs. And also, there's territorial taxes that are out there. So even though it's 21% here in the United States, they'll filter that money through Ireland or Jamaica or some of these other countries, and they get an even lower tax rate than that. And on top of that, when it comes to the profits that they make overseas, they're able to cut those in half and pay an even lower percentage. So we need to fix that so that you can start actually competing here as an American business, because you could compete if you actually had a level playing ground. So that's what
Okay.
American Workers First was about.
That sounds great. Now, how many people are in your organization? About approximate figure. Is it all just labor oriented, or do you also have support of businesses that are more attuned to American interests as opposed to many of the big multinationals that don't really care about America?
Yes, absolutely. We have some smaller businesses that can see that what's happened with these giant mega corporations that have been able to bring back these monopolies that we broke up years and years ago, how it's hurt American workers and small businesses as well. There's a reason why these companies like Walmart come into an area and all of a sudden they shut down all the mom and pop stores because they can't compete with their prices. And now that they're gone and we see inflation rising, I think one of the reasons that's happening is because the Amazons of the world and the Walmarts of the world, they've eliminated their competition. So they can raise their prices because they've got no one to compete against anymore.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned right to work, and I talk about it in my book, Right to Work, Turning the Page, My Evolution from Conservatism to Radical Civic Nationalism. I briefly discuss right to work. Um, and I agree with you, right to work is extremely detrimental to the middle class and the working classes. It actually pushes people to embrace socialism and communism insofar, the younger people, because it creates a disequilibrium, a lack of balance between capital and labor, which used to exist in this country to a large degree. And now it's often put the employee behind the eight ball vis-a-vis with the employer that has much more power. Could you tell the audience what right to work is and perhaps some of the origins, the very shady origins of right to work? Because if more people knew about it, they'd be like, whoa. So tell us about right to work.
I would love to, right? Right to work, it's a beautiful little catchphrase that came out, because who doesn't have a right to work, right? So what they're telling you is you should be able to work at any job in the state, and you shouldn't have to join a union unless you want to. And you go, I should be able to make a choice. Everyone wants to have choices, right? But what they don't tell you is that when those people opt out of paying dues, the union's still responsible for representing them. They still have to treat them like a member. They still have to represent them. They still have to bargain for them. They get all the benefits of being a non-union member. So Nevin, just common sense. If you were able today to say, I'm not going to pay taxes anymore, I still want to use your schools. I still want to use your roads. I still want you to protect my my sovereignty in this nation. I still want all those benefits, but I'm just not going to pay taxes anymore. How long do you think your neighbor's going to pay taxes? And then your city, and then your state. How long is anyone going to pay taxes? And then what happens? You bankrupt. And that was the objective of right to work, to bankrupt unions. And you can see once it was implemented, it comes from the Taft Hartley Act of 1947. So when all the soldiers were returning from World War II, and all the people that, bucked up and took care of things, and there were wage freezes right there, and they worked through it. They worked their asses off to fight the Nazis and to protect our country and to save the world. And when they were coming back and they said, all right, we've put in our part. Business is booming. Companies are making a ton of money. We want our piece of the pie. And these corporations said, holy shit, wait a second. These guys are organizing left and right. There's millions of people that are out on strike. We got to do something about this. So they lobbied Congress and they came up with the Taft Hartley Act. And what it did is it implemented right to work. That's one of the pieces that went along with it. And it got vetoed by Truman. And then they pushed it through even over a veto because, again, they lobbied like hell. So when you look at what it does and then just the origin of it, that it was designed specifically to screw our grandparents, the greatest generation, to take advantage of them. It's insidious in nature, and then in effect, it's been a death knell for unions because it kills them in the long run. Union members understand the value of a union, so they don't opt out. They continue to be there, but it is so hard to organize in a right-to-work state because when you're in that organizing campaign and you're talking to people and you're telling them, okay, we're going to sign folks up, you just got to get 50%, right? But that other 50% goes, well, I don't even have to be part of the union. I get all the benefits without doing anything. So if 40% of them say, well, I'm just going to sit back and be part of the union, get all the benefits and not pay. Well, now all you got to do is lose 11% of the people that say, I'm not going to pay for everyone else. And then all of a sudden it fails. And that's the really dirty, nasty nature of right to work.
Well, not only that, I actually would compare it to, and it was a very good analogy that you had there, but I would even compare it to me wanting to belong to a very nice country club. And I'm going to be like, I want to use all the services, but I don't want to pay the dues. And how is the business going to survive? And when you need protection from an organization, whether it's the police or the unions or the fire department, you have to pay your part into the organization no matter what. Why the exception for labor unions? That's, of course, my big question. Rhetorical question. The other thing is right to work concurrently with the Taft Hartley Act. Even before that, there were in the South certain anti-communists that unfortunately were white racialists. And there was one particular Christian American businessman by the name of Vance Muse, Vancee, last name Muse. And he was actually considered the progenitor of right to work laws. About the only thing I would agree with Vance Muse is that he was an anti-communist and he was a supporter of tariffs against dumped imports. So that's about as far as it goes. He was a nasty anti-Jewish, anti-black racist. And he, along with other Southern the anti-populist element of Southern segregationists, as well as populist racists in the South, were very concerned that the labor organizing was coming to the South, and they were recruiting both African American brothers as well as the Wright brothers in a multiracial labor coalition. There was a lot of concerns about that. So they were using divide and conquer against, of course, Dr. Martin Luther King talked about that in one of his many speeches where he discussed how the Southern populist movement that was originally multiracial in the 1890s and early 1900s was broken apart by the Bourbon Democrats in an effort to destroy populism and a sense of economic justice. And this is what Vance Muse and others were doing. They saw a threat, particularly by the Congress of Industrial Organizations, which at the time was dominated by the Communist Party USA, which, to say the least, I'm not a fan of on this show, but it still was a threat to the prevailing social order that was very unjust from a racial point of view in many of the Southern American states at the time. And he basically felt that this term right to work could be used, or this policy or program of right to work could be used to ultimately break apart the labor union movement. And then that started to gain traction with, more conservative and Republican circles that were somewhat hostile towards organized labor. And Senator Taft had a very mixed view on labor. If you look at some of his writings, he's not as anti-union as today's as the Reagan conservatives and whatnot, but he still implemented Taft Hartley, which is aspects of it was one of the worst pieces of legislation, particularly Section 14B, which initiated right to work. And it really didn't go anywhere until, there were some states in the South that adopted it, but then it started to spread with the Tea Party wave in 2010. So just give a little more of a historical background in there. But actually, my point is that right to work actually had very racist, anti-Black roots. And to me, it's just one of the most appalling warts and abscesses on American economic policy. So I noticed that you touched upon in your discussion of the key issues for American workers first. You touched upon the offshoring of call center jobs.
Sure.
That ties in with the issue of corporate-led globalization, the whole issue of free trade. What is your organization's stances and concerns on the decades-long offshoring of American manufacturing, as well as these massive amounts of dumped imports that we're receiving in the United States for decades upon decades upon decades? What's your organization's stance on that and concerns?
I'd say right now the chickens are coming home to roost, right? There's only so far that you can slide on barbed wire, and you look at all these supply chain issues, and because we gave all that work away. We gave it all away. It makes no sense that when you're talking about our medical supplies, computer chips, things that are vital to national security, we don't even have access to them anymore. We can't even make them. It would take so long to ramp up to be problematic. And it frustrates me that even after these past 2 years of seeing the problem, we still haven't pivoted on it, because you make so much money when you build that somewhere else. And it's not because of anything other than wages in those foreign countries being suppressed, safety standards being suppressed. There's a reason why you look at the fast fashion industry and those Bangladesh clothes that are being made, and you have the Rana Plaza collapse where 1,000 garment workers die over there. These people are being put in peril. We're poisoning their environments so that we can have cheap clothes, cheap toothbrushes, shop on Amazon, all of those things. It's a problem that has a solution as well, because the government, again, with federal contracts, they have a lot of money that they can put into actually bringing stuff back to the United States, which is one of the reasons why I have the name America First and American Workers First, because I think there's a lot of negativity associated with being patriotic in some ways towards the country. It's almost gotten to the point where the American flag can be seen as like a partisan issue. It's very strange to me. So I think that prioritizing American workers makes a lot more sense than American businesses that are choosing to eliminate the jobs of American workers, where they're sending those offshore, building it somewhere else. And I do believe that an injury to one is an injury to all, and that having a moral obligation to workers doesn't end at our shores. So if we're exploiting workers in the Philippines, in Thailand, in China, where they have to have a net around the Apple building because people are throwing themselves off of it rather than be in those horrible conditions, that's a problem.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. It's a national security problem, and it's also a domestic economic challenge too as well. You also mentioned about you're based in Michigan. It's a purple state. You mentioned that you have people in workplaces from all political persuasions, Republicans and Democrats. The Democrats historically, your rank and file Democrats, tend to be very pro-organized labor, particularly in a state like Michigan. We know that. But what about the Republicans? When you talk to them about these issues related to right to work, when you talk to them about, the issues of trade and globalization, also the perils perhaps of deregulation, which led to the hyper-financialization of the economy. The problem I see is that many conservatives listen to the corporate propaganda machine who masquerade as constitutionalists, like the Mark Levins and the Sean Hannitys and, Dennis Prager and Ben Shapiro and all these other individuals, and they'll talk about Constitution and freedom and whatnot. And really what they mean, in my opinion at least, is they want small government only because it serves the interests of major corporations. And like the extreme left, they will use buzzwords in order to achieve their agenda. And they'll use and pervert language. And unfortunately, the corporate conservative establishment does not shrink from doing that. How do you reach these people that are fed a diet of economic crap, basically on Fox Business, Fox and Friends, Rush Limbaugh, who is deceased, and Mark Levin and others? Because it's very powerful and it's very persuasive thanks to the deregulation of communications, amongst other things.
Yeah, I think to me, the most important thing is that I listen to them and I stop treating them like they're stupid and I stop talking down to them. I think sometimes there's an erudite nature to folks on the left where they think that they're above these things and they understand stuff that these folks on the right do not. But they're hardworking people that are just as capable of having complex thoughts as anyone else that's out there. You've just talked down to them for so long that they're no longer willing to listen to you. So the first thing that I do is usually tell them that they're right. I agree with a ton of the things that you're saying. I'm just pointing the finger back at corporations, though, and people that are in the finance game, that they're still stealing from you, that the left and the right, we've lost solidarity with workers. But I'll tell you what, businesses have complete and total solidarity amongst themselves when it comes to holding down workers. So they've been able to find common ground amongst themselves. So that's what we need to do as workers, is disagree on the stuff. I don't care what folks think about abortion. I don't care what they think about gun rights. I don't care what they think about anything that's sexuality, any of that stuff. I don't care about any of it. I talk about worker-related issues because they'll use those other things to sidetrack us, to draw divides. Just like they used racism back in the past, they still use it again today to hold people apart because we have more in common. You have more in common with a homeless guy than you do with a billionaire. So as soon as we acknowledge that and we're all in the same boat and it's sinking together, all of a sudden you start going, wow, I'm in a foxhole with y'all. When it comes to, I come from a military family, right? And if you talk to any veterans, when they're in a combat situation, it doesn't matter if the guy next to you is a Christian, an atheist, black, white. When someone's shooting at you and you're all shooting back the other direction, you're all brothers at that point. So we need to get back to that understanding that we're all in a fight here together, and it doesn't matter what the corporations or the politicians that support those corporations say back to us. You have to follow the money. You have to see where they're taking money from and where they're putting the money. And that goes back to Citizens United right there, because it's so difficult to discern where the money's coming from. And there's just such a flood of it. Because anytime someone tells me, oh, I heard this, this, and this, my first question is always, did a rich person tell you that?
And the thing is, many of these multi-billionaires and multimillionaires, sure, we have patriotic ones like Aaron Feuerstein, who's unfortunately deceased, of Molten Mills, formerly based in Massachusetts, and other patriotic, wealthy people, but the vast majority of them, and I discuss this in my book, Turning the Page, the vast majority of them are stateless and rootless. They are not attached to the United States of America or any other country. And they talk about that in detail. They say it openly. So we shouldn't be shilling for them. In fact, their political power, their wings really need to be clipped with a razor, to be honest with you. And I agree with you. Citizens United, McCutcheon, Buckley versus Vallejo, and the Bellotti decision, all dating back as far back as 1976, all need to be done away with, ideally. And it's going to take a tremendous amount of work to achieve that. But I think at the end of the day, in my opinion, I think there will be some majorly, perhaps catastrophic events, unfortunately, that will galvanize this country into action. Because I agree with you, and I'm sure Herschel would agree, that people are focused on the left as well as the right on these culture war issues. And I'm going to go out on a limb and I say, look, I don't like abortion. That's to put it mildly. But truth be told, the way to reduce or eliminate abortion is you improve the economic climate. There have been studies by both pro-life and pro-choice or pro-abortion or whatever you want to call it. It's such a word salad. Organizations, the second biggest reason why women choose to undertake abortions is because of economic conditions. How do you like that? Take a look at drug abuse, opioid abuse, crime. You look at these situations, much of it, in part, is brought upon by deteriorating economic conditions. And if you ameliorate the economic conditions, you focus in on the economics, you marry it with a sense of morality. I'm not talking about some antediluvian, what some people would view backward or whatever, but a morality based on the golden rule in the New Testament. Do unto others as you would want to do for yourself. I mean, I'm probably butchering the Bible verse. If we're guided by principles like that, our political class, our business elites, academia, and we had that as a common culture, we would really ameliorate, really improve a lot of issues going on in this country. Culture wars are a waste of time, really, to tell you the truth. It's not to say that they shouldn't be discussed, but I think we need to put the economics and the issues related to a rotting political structure first and foremost as the issue. Because people like you and I, Charles, we're not going to tell somebody because you're an evangelical Christian, you're less of a person, or if you're an atheist or an LGBT person, LGBTQ person, or African American or Hispanic American, that all of a sudden you're not worthy of being Americans, we don't like you, we want to basically ostracize you. No, I mean, look, people are going to choose their own friends, their own spouses, et cetera, et cetera. It's the nature of a relatively free society. But on the other hand, we all are united in the sense that we are American brothers and sisters, and we have to think of ourselves as a national community based on a sense of solidarity, not only worker solidarity, but also national solidarity that ultimately will transcend class and race and other potential dividing points. And the culture war issues are really over-abused and purposely perhaps used by elites, just like they were in the South, that Dr. Martin Luther King talked about to break up the multiracial populist movement. It is being used by the same forces to break up major coalitions that can bring about national renewal. I say this to my conservative audience, the conservative elements of the audience who bleat rightfully about the communist threat and the socialist threat and this and that. The people that fund your movement, they don't care. They happily clink glasses with the butchers and killers in Beijing and Moscow and go to pilgrimage to Havana like Tom Donahue of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. He goes to Havana and clink glasses with Raul Castro and Miguel Diaz-Canel. These people don't care about socialism versus communism. All they want to do is make money. Thomas Jefferson said famously in a letter that merchants have no country. They really don't. Now, mom and pop barbershop, the mom and pop restaurant, totally different story in many cases. But people like the Koch brothers, well, there's now one Koch brother left of the politically active one. And, you know, the Walmarts and the Goldman Sachs and, you know, Paul Singers and all the others, you know, pick your poison. They don't care. They're not on your side. Do you know a lot of these uber wealthy people are building shelters in abandoned and decommissioned missile silos or in countries like New Zealand, and they're prepared to flee. Once the World War III happens, or a natural disaster, or a space-related disaster happens, they don't care about you. Stop calling them job creators and being sycophantic and kissing their asses. They're just as much of a problem and as an enemy as the totalitarians domestically that are extremists, as well as our geopolitical enemies led by Moscow and Beijing. Bill Gates is not your friend.
No.
You know, the Koch brothers are not your friends. They don't care.
No.
It's not a conspiracy, it's reality.
You can't really amass that level of wealth and have a normal doctrine when it comes to fairness and kindness and rewarding others, right? I just don't see how I don't see how it's possible to it's just so much money. It's an unnatural amount of money to be able to hoard. They're like dragons guarding a cave, and they're just hoarding all this money. And they figured out that the best way for me to keep my money is to lobby these politicians with the lure of money so that they will allow me to amass even more of it. And then it just turns into this snowball that's rolling down the hill with tax breaks. And I'll tell you, Nevin, the thing that probably scares me the most in this country is the gap between the have and the have-nots, because we've seen what happens when you stretch that too thin. And with the pandemic and all the helicopter money that was put out there and the inflation that we're seeing now, I'll tell you, I'm happy that we're in the state that we are, because I think it could have been so much worse, because it's just a slight tipping point to really spiraling out of control. And poor people, desperate people, people that are hungry, the line between morality and hunger is super thin.
It's so true. That's absolutely true. You also brought up a very interesting point, and I want to pick your mind about this. You were talking about, and it's an effective tool. I use that with open-minded elements of the right as well. You know, more your dissident and free thinkers amongst the political right. And J.R. Nyquist, for example, geopolitical analyst, tends to be one of them, and who I interview on this program. He's a great guest in many ways. And that is, you center the issue away from individual powerless people to the corporations. Now, when it comes to immigration, that's an issue that I think people can get really lost in the wilderness. Now, in this program, we are not for open borders at all whatsoever. A nation cannot exist at all. A nation will be exterminated if it throws its borders totally open. And for people like you and I, nation and a sense of national community and solidarity is important. But at the same time, I could at least speak for myself, and I believe I'm speaking for you and definitely Herschel. we're not xenophobes. Anybody who knows about my personal life, like what I partake in, go on my Facebook page, who I date and everything, knows that I am the furthest thing from a xenophobe. And it's my feeling that the Republican elites in this case, as well as even the Democratic elites, will use immigration also as a culture war wedge issue, when in reality, the immigrants who are brought into this country as visa workers under the H-2A, H-2B, and H-1B and L-1 visas are the objects of exploitation. Many of these individuals want to improve their lives at some point for them, send money home to family. I've seen it up close and personal in my personal life. What is your take and your organization's take on immigration? I know it's highly controversial, but I think a lot gets lost in translation on a nuanced issue like immigration. I'm a nationalist, in a sense, civic nationalist. And immigration, when properly controlled and managed, can be potentially a good thing, but it also can be a bad thing. And I see the villains as not the individual immigrant per se, unless they're a criminal or a subversive. I see the major corporations and exploitative employers as the villain. What say you on that issue and your organization?
So American workers first. I take so much shit for the America first portion of that because people will see xenophobia, they'll see racism, classism, isolationism, and it's the farthest from the truth. I'm just saying prioritize the workers that are here. But also part of that is when you have a worker shortage, which we do, you need to be pro-immigration. You need to be bringing in people to do those jobs that you're having issues with when you go to your Starbucks, to your Arby's, to your 7-Eleven, that there isn't someone there working, that they change the hours because no one wants to work anymore. No, there's just not enough workers out there that are willing to do those jobs. But guess what? Those folks that are in those caravans that are walking hundreds of miles through dangerous areas with their kids strapped to their back, trying to get here to live the American dream, they'll work 3 of those jobs and they won't complain a second for it, and they'll be grateful, and they'll put their kids in school and they'll raise them, and it'll create opportunities. And many hands make light work, and we're stronger together. We're a nation of immigrants. That's where the country came from. But the wealthy elite have the entire time been worried that if we actually come together, that they're all of a sudden not going to be able to sit on their pedestal like they have. So I am 100% pro-immigration. When we talk about being open borders, I don't know anyone that's for open borders. That's just scare tactics that are used out there to say that they're going to come and steal your women, and brown people are going to kill you in your sleep. It's just old-timey racism bullshit that they put out there. It's meaningless. I'm pro-immigration. You have to have a system in place to do it. And one of the things to actually get there is you have to stop squabbling about the stupid stuff involved with it and actually get down to the bare bones brass tacks and start coming to solutions, as opposed to just the hyperbole and just the grandstanding part, because that's all it is. It's just grandstanding.
Well, yeah, it's some interesting points you made. I mean, I guess I would have a slight dissent, I would say, for looking at those jobs that a lot of Americans, quote, won't do. I think it's an issue of wages and whatnot. I think if you paid people a more reasonable wage, in a Starbucks, I think you would start attracting people. The other issue associated with that is, why are all these, quote, lower wage service sector jobs the employment engine for the economy statistically since at least the 1980s? That in itself is a larger structural problem that needs to be addressed. Yes, there are people that are blatantly open borders, and they have a lot of money. They might not say they're open borders like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, but functionally they are, more so than the average working class individual. You look at a lot of the libertarians, the Libertarian Incorporated, the Beltway libertarian organizations like the Cato Institute, Ludwig von Mises, for example, as I document in my book, Turning the Page. These individuals and organizations and think tanks that were recipients, including von Mises, of corporate money. I mean, he was given, I think, scholarships and grants by the Rockefellers back in decades, about half a century ago, are explicitly open borders. They will say that because, yes, they will deploy lofty rhetoric on the outside about brotherhood and whatnot, but in reality, they just want cheap and exploitable labor. And sometimes they'll say that explicitly. Because fundamentally, libertarianism, free market ideology, has a sociopathic component in it because it totally lacks empathy. It treats people like men and women like widgets and interchangeable parts without dreams, without desires, without any sense of humanity and conscience. And when you read their treatises, when you listen to them interviewed, when you even meet some of them up close and personal, I have to say I have a visceral dislike for such individuals because I was a part of the right, the Reaganite right. I used to believe in that, and there's many reasons why I don't. So, my position on immigration, I think it could be a healthy thing. I think when it's managed properly, when you have the proper process of integrating new arrivals, I call them aspiring Americans. I think that's perhaps a nice term because the ones that I have met in my own world, they do try to integrate the best they can in the American society. I'm not going to go over my policies, but I think any civic nationalist would have a federal program to integrate, these aspiring Americans or immigrants or whatnot into American society and the American economy, and give them language courses so they learn English. There's no pressure. It's very expensive to become an immigrant, to get a green card, your permanent residency. It's not cheap. I think there needs to be a much better process to integrate these individuals into the American national community. So, and besides, I also, in my personal life, I like cultural diversity, but I won't elaborate on my personal life. You could go visit my Facebook page and you can, go from there. So you were touching upon the issue of trade and our reliance on components even from geopolitical enemies. We were talking about that offline, and that pertains to today's world. As we know, Russia and Belarus, they have backed up two communist dictatorships, the People's Republic and the Donetsk People's Republic. They're advancing all parts all over Ukraine. Whatever your position on the issues, the fact of the matter is that we are reaping the seeds that we have sown because of globalization, and believing that commercial interchanges between geopolitical enemies will make them somehow kinder and nicer and gentler and making them democracies. And that if goods cross borders, that armies will not cross each other's borders if goods cross each other's borders. I'm really butchering Frederick Bastier's infamous quote, where he was a famous French classical liberal and wrong on so many accounts on so many issues. But now we see that in the case with the United States trying to levy sanctions against the Russians. And there are some challenges associated with that, like kicking out Russia from the international banking network, SWIFT, and also real challenges about putting the kibosh, meaning ending our continued imports of Russian oil and gas. Now, the position on the show, particularly my position, is that we shouldn't be trading with these countries for the most part. We should not be making ourselves vulnerable to the Russians, which has profoundly Soviet structures and cultures, despite the so-called end of the Cold War, which I believe never ended, and communist China and other countries. We are reaping the seeds that we have sown. It's really not a good situation. You look at what happened because of COVID and the breakdowns of the supply chain when it came to PPEs, and how communist China was putting the screws on that. Our dependence on communist China for pharmaceuticals. You take a look at now the supply chain issues, now that COVID has somewhat subsided, the recent supply chain issues, people getting, goods and services from overseas and even domestically, and how there are so many delays. What is your position on this whole idea of globalization and this interdependence with not only countries that have differing interests in themselves, despite the fact that they're allies, as well as outright geopolitical enemies in Moscow and Beijing? What the heck is going on here? What's your take of America? What's your take on that?
That sadly we did it to ourselves, right? And it's this extremely slow moving accident that we've been watching, and it escalated, in my opinion, really slowly. I mean, you can just look back over the years, and as an example, when you look at China, their long game, it's so friggin' impressive when they have their technology share. If you want to go over there and manufacture in China, yeah, it's super cheap, but you got to tell them exactly how you build things, how you engineer stuff, how you put it together. And what are they doing with that information? They're taking it and they're reusing it and they're building on top of it. So the gains that we used to make to get ahead, we don't get ahead when it comes to technology anymore, because they start right there with us and they continue to jump up. And again, we put federal money to those countries. We pay them essentially to take our jobs, and then we tell them how we build our products over there. And when you have companies like Lockheed Martin and Boeing that are building planes, it makes absolutely no sense to me. So for me, it all goes back to the idea that there's certain elements of your economy that you need to have some level of control over. And I'm all for free trade, but it makes no sense that it's cheaper to import steel from the other side of the world. The only way that it could be cheaper to import steel from the other side of the world is if you were giving massive tax breaks to those corporations to bring it into this country. There's just no possible way we couldn't build it here if everything was level. So it frustrates me that when you look at territorial taxes and you just look at the way that money gets filtered through these other places when it comes to their corporate profits, that it's not fair. If you want to talk about free trade, so be it, but there has to be a level playing field. American workers, they can no longer compete.
Well, yeah, and I think, again, this is a structural issue in place here, too. I think you have a clash between, and it's all great points that you've made here. There's this clash, or not a clash, but the ascendance of shareholder capitalism, this idea, developed by Milton Friedman, the famed free market globalist economist, where he talked about that the only obligation a company should have is to that of its shareholders, which in practice means the majority activist shareholders and whatnot. And it's almost repeated. Free market economics, the way economics is taught in a classical and neoclassical way, it's almost like a cult. If anybody has taken econ classes, and I've taken econ classes, they say at times the most counterintuitive things that leaves you like, this is not reality, but yet they're saying this is right. It's like the People's Temple of Jim Jones, which is, of course, the polar opposite, because that was a Stalinist communist hellhole. The professor's saying, you have to believe this, and you can't question it. This is reality. Well, I'm sorry, no, it ain't working. It's not reality, and there was a time not too long ago where those views were viewed as crackpot, essentially.
Yeah, there's
And
when your wages and your productivity were locked together. As your productivity rose, your wages rose. And then in the 70s, they broke. And economists said, holy shit, what is this? This makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And we just said, oh, I guess we just accept that. You do more, you work harder, but your dollar doesn't buy you more.
exactly. And that's what's happened. And part of the issue, our economic development model since really the first term of Ronald Reagan, even in some ways President Jimmy Carter, was this triad of this ideology of neoliberalism, of market fundamentalism. The shareholder is always right, instead of balancing interests, and stakeholder capitalism, which balanced the employees, the investors, the community, the nation, et cetera, et cetera. And they were all constituent parts that's hopefully worked in equilibrium with each other. And we moved away from that. So the investment has become more financialized. It's based on pushing paper, the off-stated casino economy, if you will. It's less, there's lesser emphasis on the development of productive capital assets, new plants, new equipment. It's all about share buybacks, which of course Reagan and his SEC commissioner, John Shad, legalized. It used to be illegal, guys.
Yeah.
You used to see a period, guys, where share buybacks was illegal. It wasn't always this way.
Yeah, because that shit's insider trading. That's what it is.
Exactly.
They know when they're stopped.
I would ban that. I'll tell you right now, I would ban that. If I was president of the United States and I had full control, one of the first things I would do is convene a commission to de-Reaganize the economy. And I would wipe out, really, in order to save free enterprise and the system of private property, I would get rid of most of the major signature deregulations that have existed within finance and communications since the 1980s. That's what I would do. And I would also get rid of this whole notion that organized money equals free speech, notably United. I would get rid of it. And then political candidates and leaders can debate the issues and decide on legislation based on the merits of their arguments, as well as to a large degree the constitutionality too. And don't forget the notion of the Constitution, that's a compromise document. I mean, political opinion was somewhat diverse back during the founders and during the 1800s. It wasn't like there's just limited government thing and that's it. And I want to tell the audience that too, because I think there's a lot of propaganda that says it was just like Little House on the Prairie or the Wild West and you just kind of whatever. No, big government at times played a huge role, combined with free enterprise, perhaps maybe a little too laissez-faire in some ways for our tastes, but you had big government. Tariffs, proposals for the national bank, Alexander Hamilton, for example, infrastructure, land grants. I mean, you had presidents. I mean, even George Washington supported national health care for veterans and servicemen, for example. I mean, there's a lot of nuances that I think a lot of people are not aware of when it comes to the founding of the American Republic. So I wanted to inject that in there for the sake of the audience to kind of get them to think or rethink our history. But I think in order to really get America back on the productive track, we have to, by public policy, really move back to reinvigorating the idea of stakeholder capitalism and combine that with a rational economic nationalism. And that's basically, you have to de-Reaganize and de-Clintonize the economy, essentially. That's what has to happen. And it's going to take a strong central government and a sense of national will to do that. In today's current political climate, do you think that's possible, Charles? Do you think it's possible in the future? $64,000 question.
God, as an activist, I sure hope so, Nevin. I sure hope so. As a as an extremely pro-work. I don't think you can be pro-worker without being pro-union. And as a pro-union labor activist, unions are enjoying a renaissance right now. We're seeing all kinds of folks in the tech field that are coming together, in the service field, these Amazon workers, the Starbucks workers, folks that have never had unions before are all of a sudden saying, you know what, this isn't just for people working at plants or auto lines. This is good for everyone, because when we come together as a group and we can collectively bargain, and most folks out there don't even know what collectively bargaining means. They don't know what just cause is. They don't know what a duty of fair representation is. They don't know all of the perks that come from being union. But if you can get a chance to tell them, hey, do you think you should be making more money? Do you not get treated well at your job? Is your boss an asshole? Well, guess what? If you can get a contract that says there's mutual respect between you and them, and they can't talk to you in certain ways, and if they want you to stay for overtime, they got to give you X amount of notice, otherwise they got to pay you Y otherwise, all of a sudden people start saying, you know what, maybe that's not so bad. And I don't think unions are for everyone, but I think they should be for everyone that wants them. So yes, I do think that we can fix it, and I think it's going to be the kids that are coming up that are going to figure it out, because they're going to look at it from sideways angles that you and I can't even perceive. And they're going to be on TikTok making all kinds of crazy shit that, I don't understand, but it's going to get 1 million views, and it's going to, spur some of these kids to get together and organize. And the new labor leaders are going to come out of it. And I'm super stoked to be a part of it and to watch them and just to help them.
Yeah, me too. I would agree with you. I think we have the seeds of leadership in places and with people that are average men and women, and I think that's where we're going to get, whether it's massive catastrophes it's going to bring that out, but I think adversity ultimately is going to breed and bring to the fore many leaders from quarters, people that we don't know. And they may have YouTube channels like ours, for example. That's another wonderful thing. YouTube is the best marketplace for information. The network news sucks. CNN, MSNBC, especially after they got rid of Ed Schultz and Crystal Ball, like, that's about it. Sucks. It's corporate liberal. Exactly, GE money, amongst other things.
All about that money.
Fox News is like labor-hating reactionary propaganda, but yet Rupert Murdoch clinches close deals with the Chinese Communist Party and supposedly has money stashed in communist Cuba, according to one article, I think it was from Mainstream Press. So Fox News is just a machine for big reactionary business interests. So YouTube is the best way to go, because many of us young people, we're tired of the mainstream narrative. It's crap, most of it. They don't cover enough issues that are affecting working people and hardworking small businessmen and businesswomen and large companies that are patriotic. They don't talk about the struggles of the working poor and average people of all races and colors and this and that and everything else. They don't talk about, now there's more of a hard right position, that really the Cold War hasn't ended, because they view people like J.R. Nyquist and I as kooks and nut jobs for saying that Russia really fundamentally remained a Soviet-style country. And then, by the way, globalization is a great thing, and we can trade with all these countries, and everything will be hunky-dory and, purple unicorns and rainbows. So my next question is, moving to the State of the Union address that Joe Biden gave. Now, both of your organization and my program are not only nonpartisan, transpartisan. We have a grab bag of different ideas and ideologies and policy proposals. What is your take on the State of the Union speech given by Joe Biden, the words, and I like to say the rhetoric and the reality of America? As Joe Biden said, are we really fundamentally strong? because I see a country that right now has a tremendous amount of strength and reserve, but I also feel that we're fundamentally weak. We are fundamentally divided. You have mental illness and suicide on the rise, and you have some, like Tom Hartman, man, I have some profound disagreements with, but he wrote many years ago an article in Alternet which talked about how neoliberal market fundamentalism, that atomistic ideology, helps contribute to the rise of suicide and mental illness and dependence on prescription, drugs to control these mental illnesses. And I can go on, my views on the true State of the Union. But what are your thoughts on the true State of the Union, Biden's speeches and policies, good, bad, and ugly?
So the part that really jumped out at me that I loved is when he was talking about the PRO Act. He was talking about the Protecting the Right to Organize Act and just how important it is to get that passed, because that would be a game changer when it comes to the labor movement. It would just, it's a wish list of things that would be beneficial and helpful and give us some actual power back in the hands of workers. So when he was talking about that, I was tuned in because he says all the right things when it comes to labor. I try not to get into the weeds too much on the other sort of ancillary items because I find that I can just talk in circles with it. But with his PRO Act talk, and then with the Build Back Better, let me focus on one thing, like specifically part of the infrastructure plan with broadband and rebuilding our broadband and actually getting fiber optics, high-speed internet out to rural areas, which I think is really important. And if you look at the Rural Electrification Act of 1936, it changed the country. When they brought electricity out to all those folks and all of a sudden people had, ice boxes, refrigerators in their houses, it just fundamentally changed the country. And I think that data, broadband, it's the new electrification. If we can get it out to folks, it's knowledge, it's power, it uplifts, it doesn't discriminate between people. A poor kid and a rich kid, if they have the same internet, they can learn at the same speed, they can see the same stuff. There's opportunity there. And going back to the very thing that we started talking about first, a lack of opportunity, I believe, is the biggest anchor to the people in this country because they just don't see anywhere that they can go to. It's not like it was when I was coming out of high school where you could go get a plant job and make 50 grand a year and in 30 years retire and have a pension. And maybe you weren't rich, but you had a little place up north, you had a boat, you were able to take some vacations with your family, and it doesn't exist anymore. I am really concerned that where are these kids in this gig society are going to go when they become too old to work and they don't have any pensions. They didn't save any money. So for me, the State of the Union, the most important thing that he was talking about was the PRO Act, because it zeroed in on exactly what I think is the most important piece of legislation of my lifetime for workers.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think the PRO Act, him mentioning the PRO Act, yes, it's a good thing. Rural broadband, I totally agree with. I discussed that in my infrastructure discussion in my book, Turning the Page. Actually, studies show that it will also spur business growth too as well. I think the rural areas need to be served better by a national health insurance system. I believe a national health insurance combined with private enterprise in the delivery of medicine. So I think we need to go about vastly expand medical services to the rural community, rural broadband, improved infrastructure. Particularly West Virginia is very hard hit by poor infrastructure as a result of corruption and whatnot. And also taking a look at expanding things like the postal services too as well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the poorer communities revert back to also postal banking, which used to exist before LBG, Lyndon Baines Johnson started to dissolve that. My biggest concern about the Biden administration, the Democratic administration, is become a lot like Obama on the domestic front, where they had a mandate for populist economic policy, civic nationalist economic policy, and Biden was sold as this FDR. Now, when you look at Biden's record on key issues like crime, economics, trade, he was a disaster. He voted to repeal Glass-Steagall, voted for the anti-consumer bankruptcy bill of 2005, voted for NAFTA, supported permanent normal trade relations with Putin, and, supported free trade with China, PNTR, that's permanent normal trade relations with the People's Republic of China, et cetera, et cetera. I could go on and on and on. So he really did not have this record, this bedrock of populism that, say, a Russ Feingold did on the social democratic left, the famed senator, the former senator from Wisconsin, or dissident Republican populists like former Congressman Walter Jones from North Carolina. He didn't have that in his blood. And now it's becoming like Obama, where the profound reforms that I think many Americans, through gut instinct, were craving for didn't materialize, and that he didn't replicate himself like FDR and call out the economic royalists that are represented by some within the Democratic Party, notably Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, as well as the vast majority of Republican senators and congressmen and congresswomen, and shame these people. Because the corporations and their political lickspittles, they're playing for keeps. And you have to fight fire with fire. And my concern is that polls show that the reactionary elements and the corporate globalists within the GOP, they are gaining popularity. And once again, we're going to have another repetition of the Tea Party in 2010, and we're going to get those people in congressional majorities. And that's going to be a disaster for working people and other national-minded elements within the American community. And that is my concern, is that really Biden, his administration, and many within the congressional Democrats, they haven't shamed people like Joe Manchin. Kyle Kulinski, the YouTube commentator, he made a lot of interesting points. He was talking about how Biden could have used anti-corruption legislation against Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin. He basically, because of how their kids were tied in, Joe Manchin, I think, has a daughter that was tied in with the opioid industry and whatnot, and how Kristen Sinema took $750,000 from the pharmaceutical industry and mysteriously changed her position on lowering prescription drugs, and then also threatening primaries against these people. I mean, the Club for Growth, which is a libertarian globalist so-called free market organization that loves free trade with Russia and China, they threaten, Republicans all the time with primaries, God forbid, if they want to raise taxes on major corporations. So I look at that, and FDR had his fireside chats and his speeches and everything calling out the economic royalists and their political lickspittles. And from the position of this show, or at least myself, and I know Herschel would agree with me on this because we've talked about Biden before, what, in your opinion, what is going on? What the hell is going on with the Democratic Party, with the populists in the Democratic Party, and what steps can you suggest on how the populists within the Democratic Party can really push out and really blame and liberal corporatists that are aligned more with the Republicans than with the people?
Oh man, that's a tough one, Nevin. So
That's
yes,
okay.
I have extreme frustration on this, and I'll give you a specific reason. One of our tenets of American Workers First is national call center legislation, right? It's already out there. It's been introduced. Mark Pocan's a congressman out of Wisconsin, and I believe David McKinley's a congressman out of Kentucky. One is a Democrat, one is a Republican. And they introduced national call center legislation that would say that if you're a company that's closing down call centers in the United States and sending those jobs offshore, you're not eligible for federal loans and grants. And then when people say, I want to be transferred to a representative of the United States, they have to transfer you back to a representative of the United States. No one is going to be against that. There's 3 states that have call center legislation enacted: New York, super duper liberal, and Alabama and Mississippi, as red as you can possibly get, because they meet you in the middle when it comes to call center legislation. So tell me, How is it possible that we have a president that is pro-worker, that this isn't an issue that we can push through so that he can have a win when it comes to workers? Why is that not there? It's because companies push back so hard on these things, and they're so afraid of losing their money, even though they see the people like Bernie Sanders raising money just from individual small donors. You can outpace these people if you just be an actual champion for working people. And so national call center legislation, it makes no sense to me that that's not something that we push through. He could put in CEO limits where when it comes to the median pay between the CEO workers and them, that there's tariffs in place for the companies. They could have done stuff with the federal contracts where they weren't going to offshore that work. They were going to take it away from companies. There was all kinds of things that could have been done. But instead, they decided to focus on these massive infrastructure plans, which I get. But man, if they just broke some of that stuff apart, and because they're holding people hostage, right? We want to get all of this, so we're going to put this stuff in here, and then we're going to call you a bad name if you don't give us all of it. But they could have broke it apart and piecemealed it, and we could have actually got something substantial. And sometimes good is the enemy of great.
Couldn't have said it better. I couldn't have said it better. There's a tremendous amount of corporate lobbying with this. It's the same with the sanctions against the Russians. David Sirota recently penned an article which talked about that, how Wall Street is really pushed against the sanctions on the Russians. It's the same thing all over again. And one of the things that I think can unite the patriotic elements of the right and the patriotic elements on the left is we all agree that excessive corporate power is detrimental to the domestic growth, shared but earned prosperity of Americans, as well as our national security. This is why on this program, I've developed a program partially in the spirit of great broadcasters like the late Chuck Carter, who I've appeared on his show years ago, and others who bring right and left together, free thinkers on the left and right together, patriots from both sides, to talk about the issues, to lend the audience their expertise and their nuanced views. This is why we have people on the right like J.R. Nyquist and people like you, Charles. I don't know if I could call you on the left. By my definition, I think you're more kind of like in the radical center, what used to be called the radical center or the vital center. I think you have a hodgepodge of views. But I guess since you're labor, we'll say the left, the right, whatever. This is why we have, and one of the things I'd like to do on this program is develop a coalition maybe in the future and be one of the many voices that really discusses and bring up the issues that are not discussed on mainstream media. And I think this is where organizations like American Workers First, like the Populist Patriot, like Herschel's Facebook group, which has gained tremendous members, the Patriotic Populist, has gained a lot of traction, and he's done some coalition building too as well with labor. Great work on his end. Yeah. So tell us, how can we get involved with American Workers First, average working men and women? Where can we find you on Facebook, the World Wide Web? Can we sign up and become a member, an activist? Tell us about that in closing.
Yes, absolutely. So our website is www.americanworkersfirst.org. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/AmericanWorkersFirst. On Twitter, we're USA Workers First. And man, all I need is folks to like and share stuff. That's it. And if you want to be my hero, there's a lot of Facebook groups out there: Union Strong for Life, Union Till I Die, Union Activists, Union Members Only, Union Workers of America, that have thousands, if not tens of thousands of members on there. Join one of those groups. And if you're pro-worker and you see something that you like, take it and share it to one of those groups. I'm a Christian, Nevin. I believe blessed are the peacemakers. I believe that we need to come and let us reason together. So we need to find common grounds on these things. And a lot of the mobilization that we can do nowadays, it is quick, it is easy, and it is amazing how much one motivated, dedicated person can do to move the needle. And folks out there, if you're listening, that can be you. If someone tells you that you can't do something, what they're actually saying is that they can't do it. You can do anything. If you believe in something and you're mad about this stuff, take action.
Yep, and this is why you developed American Workers First. This is why I developed in partnership with Herschel Miller, my co-host, this program. And we're going to continue to reach hopefully many Americans in the years, the months, years to come. Thank you so much, Charles, for joining us. You were a great guest. We definitely want to have you again, perhaps as a semi-regular guest. And any other closing comments before we go?
Just, I appreciate it, brother. And if I could say one more thing, I don't spend a second of my day feeling bad for rich people and not a moment of my day being angry at poor people. Those are my two rules.
Amen, brother. By the way, full disclosure to any populists and pro-union people out there, I am a member of my own union that I belong to. It's a division, I believe, of the AFL-CIO. It's the Government Supervisors Association down here in state of Florida. Proud union member for many, many years, and I am Jewish, and just like you're a Christian, and I do talk to God. That's how I call my prayers, and I pray in thanksgiving for all the blessings that we all have been bestowed in our careers, in our personal lives. And, we all pray for an improved future for all classes of society in the United States and for victory over our adversaries. And I just want to close and say, enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone, and God bless America, and be safe and be healthy and have a productive and fulfilling week.
Thanks, brother.